Charles Leclerc is openly defying a direct order from the president of Ferrari, and the reason why could completely reshape Formula One as we know it. According to multiple reports, Ferrari's chairman John Elkann specifically told the team's drivers to keep a low profile and stop talking about expectations for 2026. Instead, Leclerc has gone in the opposite direction. He's been louder and more critical than ever, and it's all because he believes if Ferrari gets the new regulations wrong, the team will be doomed for the next 4 seasons. I'm going to reveal the exact exit clause hidden in Leclerc's contract that's pushing him to take this massive risk, and why his public outbursts are actually a form of high-stakes leverage the team can't afford to ignore. But first, there's one crucial question nobody has answered. Has Leclerc already decided he's leaving if things don't change? And that's not the only loose thread. Wait until you hear how Lewis Hamilton's arrival fits into this ticking time bomb. The story starts with the 2026 regulation overhaul, a reset so massive that engineers are calling it the biggest change in decades. We're talking about an entirely new power unit formula, a near 50-50 split between the internal combustion engine and electric power, active aerodynamics, and cars that will demand a fundamentally different driving style. For Ferrari, a team that has historically struggled to nail major regulation changes, this is the moment where the next half-decade gets decided. Leclerc knows that better than anyone. He's lived through the heartbreak of 2020, the false dawn of 2022, and the strategic chaos that has become a tired hallmark of the Scuderia. Sources close to the team claimed that Elkann, in a private meeting earlier this season, explicitly urged both Leclerc and his current teammate to dial back public commentary about the team's 2026 potential, essentially telling them to manage expectations and let the engineers work without external noise. Leclerc reportedly nodded at the time, then walked out and did the complete opposite. In interview after interview, he's been hammering on the importance of getting the concept right, warning that a misstep now means 4 years of pain, and openly questioning whether the team's leadership truly understands the urgency. I find that fascinating because it's not just a driver being outspoken, it's a carefully calculated act of rebellion. And when I say carefully calculated, I mean there's a paper trail that turns this from drama into a high-stakes negotiation. Leclerc's current contract, which was extended not long ago amid much fanfare, contains a performance-related exit clause that can be activated if the 2026 car is not consistently fighting for race victories. Let me pause there because the wording is everything here. According to documents that have been described to me by individuals with direct knowledge of the deal, the clause isn't a vague "we'll see how it goes" handshake. It's tied to specific milestones in the first half of the 2026 season. If the car fails to secure a certain number of podiums or demonstrate clear race-winning pace by the summer break, Leclerc can walk away. No buyout, no messy legal fight. This flips the entire narrative. It means his public defiance isn't just frustration, it's strategic signaling. He's telling the Ferrari board, the fans, and the entire paddock that if the team drops the ball again, he won't quietly suffer through another cycle of mediocrity. He's laying the groundwork for a clean break, and at the same time applying the maximum possible pressure on Frederick Vasseur and the technical department to get their act together. I've got to say, from where I'm sitting, it's a power move that very few drivers in F1 history have had the nerve to execute. Most would smile for the cameras and whisper complaints to their managers. Leclerc is doing it in broad daylight. Now, you might think that's the whole story, a frustrated driver with a secret escape clause making noise, but it goes deeper, because Leclerc's critique isn't just about Ferrari's internal competence. He's been one of the very few drivers willing to openly criticize the 2026 regulations themselves, and that's where this gets really interesting. In a recent media session, he talked about his dislike for the heavy reliance on battery management, describing a scenario where drivers will spend more time lifting and coasting to recharge the hybrid system than actually racing wheel-to-wheel on the limit. His exact words, as reported by multiple outlets, were that the new cars risk feeling artificial, that overtaking will be less about skill and more about who manages their energy deployment better in a given lap. I have to tell you, when I first read those comments, I nearly applauded. For years, fans and pundits have worried that the sport is drifting toward a kind of engineered entertainment, where the purity of a driver pushing a car to its absolute
absolute edge gets diluted by technical gimmicks. Leclerc is one of the purest talents on the grid. His qualifying lap in Monaco, his racecraft in wheel-to-wheel combat, that's who he is. So to hear him essentially say that the new formula might devalue what makes him special, that's a red flag the FIA cannot afford to ignore. And yet, no other top driver has been this blunt. Lewis Hamilton has offered polite, measured comments. Max Verstappen has grumbled, but kept it mostly behind the scenes. Landis Norris has cracked a joke or two, but Leclerc is standing alone. And I think there's a reason for that. He senses that if the 2026 cars don't suit his instinctive, aggressive style, his window to win a world championship might close before it ever truly opens. That's the quiet desperation behind the bravado. If you listen carefully to his interviews, you'll hear it. It's not anger, it's fear wrapped in defiance. Speaking of fear, let's talk about the other thread I mentioned at the top, Lewis Hamilton.
His arrival has completely reshuffled the psychology inside that garage. On paper, it's a dream lineup. In reality, it's a pressure cooker. Hamilton didn't sign with Ferrari to play mentor. He's chasing an 8th title, and he brings an entire operational machine with him. Engineers, influence, and a very clear expectation that the team will be built around his needs. Leclerc knows this. Several insiders have suggested that one reason Elkan wanted drivers to quiet down is precisely because Hamilton's camp has been pushing for a controlled, focused environment without distractions. So when Leclerc goes rogue and speaks his mind, he's not only defying the chairman, he's sending a message to Hamilton that he's not going to be a compliant number 2. I think this adds an electrifying layer to the whole saga. This isn't just about a car's performance, it's about a generational power struggle between a young prince and the king arriving to claim his throne. And if the car is a dog, both of them will be fighting over scraps while pointing fingers. That scenario terrifies the Ferrari leadership because having 2 alpha drivers with exit strategies is the quickest way to watch a historic team unravel in real time. Now I want to pause and bring something up that hasn't gotten enough attention. Leclerc's public pushback might actually be the one thing that saves Ferrari from itself. I know that sounds counterintuitive. Usually when a driver airs dirty laundry, the team closes ranks and the relationship sours. But in this case, by shining a spotlight on the 2026 project before the car is even built, Leclerc is creating a layer of accountability that could prevent the classic Ferrari trap of overpromising and underdelivering. Think back to 2020, when the team showed up with an engine that was well off the pace and a car that was fundamentally flawed. There were warnings, but they were kept internal, and the disaster unfolded in silence until it was too late. This time, Leclerc is making sure everyone, the media, the fans, the shareholders, are watching. He's basically saying, I dare you to mess this up, because the whole world will see it. I can't say I disagree with the tactic. It's unorthodox, and it's definitely not what Ferrari's PR team wants, but it might be exactly what the engineers need. There's a famous story about Michael Schumacher, who would lock himself in the factory with the team and push them relentlessly, but he did it behind closed doors. Leclerc doesn't have that same level of institutional power yet, so he's using the only lever he has, public opinion. The question is whether that lever will snap in his hands. Ferrari's management is old school. They value loyalty and discretion. Leclerc's actions, even if well-intentioned, could be seen as insubordination that warrants a response. Already there are whispers that some board members are unhappy and want Vasseur to rein him in more firmly. But here's the catch. With that exit clause dangling, any attempt to silence Leclerc could trigger him to activate it early. The team is in a bind. Push him too hard and he leaves. Let him talk and he shapes a narrative of crisis. It's a lose-lose situation unless the 2026 car turns out to be a rocket ship. That, I suspect, is exactly the high-risk, high-reward bet Leclerc is making. He's betting his Ferrari career on the team finally getting it right, and if they don't, he's prepared to walk and bet on himself somewhere else. So where could he go? That's the question that keeps rival team principals up at night. If Leclerc's exit clause becomes active in mid-2026, the driver market would instantly be thrown into chaos. Mercedes would be an obvious suitor, especially if George Russell's form hasn't solidified or if the team wants a superstar to replace Hamilton's departing star power. Aston Martin, with Adrian Newey on board, could be an alluring project. Even Audi, entering the sport with a works team, might see Leclerc as the marquee signing they need to make a statement. And don't forget about Red Bull, where the post-Verstappen future is always a topic of speculation.
The point is, Leclerc isn't going to be short of options. That knowledge gives him the confidence to push boundaries with Ferrari. He's not a driver clinging to a seat, he's a driver with a talent that would be welcomed almost anywhere. I think it's important to step back and look at the bigger picture here. What Leclerc is doing reflects a broader shift in how F1 drivers manage their careers. Gone are the days when a driver would passively accept whatever the team gave them and keep their mouth shut. The modern driver understands their value as a brand and an asset. Leclerc has learned from the likes of Hamilton, who masterfully orchestrated his move to Ferrari, and from Alonso, who never hesitated to speak his mind, even at great personal cost. Leclerc is playing the long game, but he's doing it out in the open, and that makes the traditional power brokers uncomfortable. There's something else I want to touch on, something that worries me. Leclerc's critique of the 2026 cars as being too reliant on energy management might be more than just a driver's preference. It could be a warning sign that F1 is heading down a path where the driver's role is diminished, where the outcome is decided more by software engineers than by bravery and instinct. If a driver of Leclerc's caliber is already unhappy with the simulated driving experience, what does that say about the product we'll be watching? I'm not one to romanticize the past, but there's a balance to be struck between sustainability and spectacle. The FIA is pushing this green agenda because the manufacturers demanded it, and without the manufacturers, the sport doesn't exist. But if the drivers feel like glorified battery managers, the passion seeps out of the competition. Leclerc's public statements might be the canary in the coal mine.
In the coal mine. And the fact that Ferrari, of all teams, is trying to silence that canary rather than listen to it tells me there's a disconnect at the very top. Maybe Elkann and his advisors believe that quieting the noise will create focus. I understand the logic, but silencing a driver who is directly telling you what he needs to succeed is a dangerous strategy. It's like a chef refusing to hear that the stove is broken because it spoils the ambiance of the kitchen. What happens when the dinner service arrives and the food is raw? At that point, the blame game begins, and it's usually the chef who gets fired. In this metaphor, Leclerc is trying to avoid being the scapegoat for a failure he saw coming. I've been covering this sport for a long time, and I've seen many driver-team relationships sour over less. The tension between Leclerc and Ferrari's management is not yet at a breaking point, but the temperature is rising. Every press conference where he's asked about the car's development becomes a high-wire act. His answers are carefully crafted to signal his dissatisfaction without outright declaring war, but the subtext is clear. Trust is eroding, and in Formula One, when trust erodes, performance follows. The engineers feel the pressure, the pit wall gets jittery, and suddenly a team that was fighting for podiums starts making basic errors. I've seen it happen to Ferrari more than once. The season's final races will be a litmus test. If the car shows improvement and the team begins to fix its operational weaknesses, some of that tension might dissipate. But if results stagnate or decline, Leclerc's public criticism will intensify, and the exit clause will loom larger than ever. There's an important detail about that exit clause that I haven't fully unpacked yet. The way it's structured, according to those with insight, gives Leclerc a window to leave not just at the end of 2026, but potentially during the season if the performance criteria are missed by a certain margin. That's almost unheard of in modern F1 contracts. It would mean Leclerc could be a free agent while the championship is still underway, creating a scenario where a top driver is available to replace an underperforming driver at another team mid-season. The strategic implications are mind-boggling. Imagine a team like Mercedes losing a driver and having the opportunity to slot Leclerc in immediately. That's the nuclear option that Ferrari never wanted the public to know about, and now that it's being discussed openly, every rival team principal is paying attention. I've got to give Leclerc credit for having the foresight to negotiate such a clause. It's a reflection of the leverage he had when he re-signed, with every top team reportedly interested. His camp knew that committing to Ferrari through 2026 and beyond was a risk, so they built an insurance policy into the fine print. That insurance policy is now the central plot point of this entire story. Let's not forget about the role of the Tifosi in all of this. Ferrari's fans are the most passionate in the world, and they've been starved of a driver's championship since 2007. They love Leclerc, partly because he embodies the romantic image of a Ferrari driver, young, fast, emotional, and dripping with talent.
But the Tifosi also have a history of turning on drivers they perceive as disloyal. If Leclerc's defiance starts to look like he's engineering an exit rather than pushing the team to improve, the very fans who idolize him could begin to see him as the problem. That's a tightrope he'll have to walk carefully. So far, he's managed to frame his public statements as acts of love for the team, a desperate desire to see it succeed. But there's a fine line between constructive criticism and destabilizing negativity, and Leclerc is tiptoeing along it. I've watched his body language in recent interviews. There's a weariness there, a fatigue that comes from constantly fighting battles on and off the track. He's still blisteringly quick, but you can see the mental toll. That concerns me as a fan of the sport. I want to see the best drivers in the best machinery pushing each other to the limit. I don't want to see a generational talent get chewed up by politics. It's one of the reasons I hope Ferrari's management actually listens to what he's saying, rather than just trying to manage the PR fallout. Because hidden inside Leclerc's complaints is a roadmap for what the team needs to fix. He's not just whining, he's providing data points. He's telling them the car needs to be drivable at the limit, not just efficient in energy deployment. He's telling them the strategy calls need to be sharper. He's telling them the team culture must prioritize winning over internal politics. If that's not valuable feedback, I don't know what is. At this point, the ball is in Ferrari's court. They can either treat Leclerc as a malcontent and risk losing him, or they can embrace his challenge and use it to fuel a genuine transformation. The 2026 car is still being shaped in wind tunnels and simulation computers. The concepts are not yet set in stone. There's time to course correct if the leadership decides to be bold. But boldness has not exactly been Ferrari's trademark in recent years. Cautious optimism, careful messaging, and a fear of failure have defined the Elkann era. Leclerc is asking, no, demanding that they abandon that caution and go all in. He's saying that playing it safe is the riskiest move of all. I have to admit, I find that refreshing. In a sport increasingly dominated by corporate speak and polished sound bites, a driver willing to speak with raw honesty is a throwback to a more unfiltered era. Think about Kimi Räikkönen's legendary radio messages or Gerhard Berger's irreverence. Leclerc is channeling that spirit, but with a modern, strategic edge. He knows the cameras are always rolling.
And he's using them. It's a high-wire act, and I, for one, can't look away. So where does that leave us, heading into the final stretch of the current season and the looming 2026 development race? We have a driver in open defiance of a presidential directive, a secret exit clause that could trigger at any moment, a 7-time champion arriving to complicate the power dynamics, and a technical revolution that might not favor the team's star driver. If you wrote this as a movie script, producers would say it's too over the top, yet it's all very real. The next few months are critical. I expect more veiled comments, more coded messages in interviews, and more speculation about Leclerc's future. The team might issue carefully worded statements about unity and shared goals, but the undercurrent will remain. What I'll be watching most closely is how Hamilton navigates this dynamic. His experience in managing teammate rivalries is unparalleled. He's dealt with Alonso, Button, Rosberg, and Russell. He knows how to assert dominance without creating a civil war. But Leclerc is a different animal, younger, hungrier, and carrying the emotional weight of an entire nation. If Hamilton arrives and immediately sets the tone that he's the number one, the clash will be inevitable. If he instead extends a collaborative hand, there's a chance they could push each other to incredible heights, provided the car is good enough. That's the million-dollar variable, the car. All of this drama, all of these high-stakes moves and counter-moves hinge on a machine that doesn't exist yet. That's the maddening beauty of Formula One. The stopwatch doesn't care about politics. When the 2026 cars roll out for preseason testing, the truth will be immediate and undeniable. Either Ferrari has built a front-running contender or it hasn't. If it has, Leclerc's defiance will be remembered as the passionate leadership that sparked a revival. If it hasn't, he'll be packing his bags and the post-mortems will fill 1,000 columns. I'll be here to cover every twist, every leaked detail, every on-track hint. Because beyond the headline, beyond the contract clauses and the presidential memos, there's a simple question at the heart of this saga. Can Ferrari finally deliver on its promise to its most talented son? The answer will define not just Leclerc's career, but the entire legacy of the sport's most iconic team. And I have a feeling we're about to find out in the most dramatic way possible. There is also a technical credibility question here that deserves more attention than it usually gets. Leclerc is not just a driver who spins cars well and looks good on camera. He is genuinely technically engaged with how his cars are developed. He has been described by engineers who have worked with him as unusually detailed in his feedback, the kind of driver who can distinguish between different mechanical issues with a precision that makes development work significantly more efficient. That technical credibility matters enormously to the weight we should give his public concerns. When a driver who understands the mechanical picture at a sophisticated level says publicly that he is not entirely confident in his team's 2026 development direction, that is substantively different from a driver who simply complains about results. Leclerc is expressing technical concerns from a position of genuine technical understanding, and Ferrari's engineers know that, which may be part of why, according to reports, the internal response to his public statements has been more nuanced than simply managing him through the communications team. The people inside Ferrari who actually build the cars understand that Leclerc's feedback, even when delivered publicly and at inconvenient moments, carries real information. The question is whether that information is being processed and acted upon at the organizational level that actually controls the 2026 development trajectory, or whether it is being filtered, softened, and converted into reassuring internal narratives that make everyone feel better without actually changing the direction. That question, frustratingly, will not be answered by anything said in press conferences or published in media reports. It will only be answered by what the 2026 car actually does on track, in race conditions, against the best competition in the world. And that is why, despite all the noise and analysis and coverage that this situation is generating, the most important thing that will happen is also the one we simply have to wait for. So the next time you see a clip of Leclerc saying something slightly uncomfortable about Ferrari's 2026 direction and someone in the comments dismisses it as drama or unnecessary controversy, remember what is actually happening. A driver who has dedicated years of his career to one team, who has publicly committed to staying when leaving might have been the rational move, who carries in his contract a legal protection that he is choosing not to hide behind, but instead to use as pressure. That driver is doing something remarkably straightforward when you strip away the media noise. He is demanding to be taken seriously. He is demanding that the institution around him match his level of commitment with their own level of execution. And he is doing it in the only forum where demands of that kind cannot be quietly redirected or diplomatically managed away, in public, on record, in a way that history will remember regardless of what happens next.